Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Studying Poetry Techniques, Terms and Concepts PowerPoint. I am sorry for the delay in this week's PowerPoint, but quite glad to have some repairs made to my computer. As we move into our second unit and focus on writing an analytical essay about a work of poetry, you're going to do a lot of the same things you've already been doing in writing about prose fiction. You're still looking at some version of things like theme, plot, and setting. The plot of a poem, except for a long narrative poem like the Odyssey, might be a relatively simple plot, one conversation, one thought, one moment, but you'll still be able to identify a sequence of action. And setting may be important. Tone, mood, and voice will be more important. Very often a poem is focused on creating an emotional experience for the reader. And of course, you want to continue looking for figurative language, metaphors, imagery, use of different colors, use of different political and historical references, whatever it may be. And from there, you'll make analytical arguments. And to get started, I encourage you to just read straight through. Particularly with some of the older poems we'll be starting with, the language may be a bit unfamiliar and a bit off-putting at the beginning, but don't let that stop you. Just read through, get a sense of the poem, try and kind of swallow it whole, and then go back through and do a close reading. Go line by line. And you're going to annotate the poem for analysis in two different ways. You'll scan for rhyme and meter, and I'll say more about that here in a moment. And then you will also scan for other literary elements. The figurative language, the images, the use of character, the use of names, and all the rest of it. You may have the need to seek references, but for our purposes, most any such references that you'll need will be covered by the footnotes in your textbook. And pay attention to details, and there again, you'll create your arguments. So, as you begin to analyze, I'm sure you'll remember learning back in second grade that poems don't have to rhyme, but many poems do. And you'll look for patterns, you'll label the sounds of a poem. Take a moment here to just grab a piece of scratch paper and scrawl down a couple of lines of a nursery rhyme you might remember, like Mary Had a Little Lamb, or an advertising jingle, or a song you know. Now that you've done that, go through and label the sound at the end of the first line with an A. And then if the sound at the end of the next line matches it, label it with another A. So that's rhyming couplets, like hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. If it alternates back and forth, it might go A, B, like Mary had a little lamb. A, his fleece was white as snow. B, and everywhere that Mary went. C, the lamb was sure to go. B. And identifying a rhyme pattern is an effective way of describing a poem, getting a handle on what a writer might be doing. You'll notice that first pattern here listed, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G, is the pattern of rhyme used in the Shakespeare sonnets. And if you go and take a look, say, on the MIT Shakespeare, which is entirely free, at all 154 sonnets, that is the rhyme scheme that Shakespeare chose. Milton and Donne are also writing sonnets, but they choose different rhyme schemes. And then you'll analyze rhythm and meter. If anybody has done theater before and marked up your dialogue for pacing and breathing, or if you've ever taken music lessons and counted measures, some of this will look a little bit familiar to you. You will divide lines up into groups of syllables, or feet. And there will be more specific information about this in a couple of the discussion boards to follow. But this is just an introduction. Iambic meter is supposedly the type of poetic meter that is most like natural speech. It's unstressed syllables followed by stressed syllables in pairs. So something like a Shakespeare line. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? If you flip the iamb around, stress the first syllable and then don't stress the second syllable, you get the trochee. Something like in the John Donne poem, "Batter, my heart, three-personed God for you." Some lines will then divide into groups of three. If you have, say, a 6-syllable line or maybe a 12-syllable line and you look at the stress pattern, you might find that it is anapestic or dactylic. So an anapest would essentially be an extended iamb with 2 unstressed syllables and a stressed syllable. And a dactylic foot would be essentially an extended trochee with a stressed syllable followed by 2 unstressed syllables. And then 2 kind of variation feet that crop up in poetry are the spondaic foot, which is 2 stresses right together. You see John Donne do that in Death Be Not Proud that you read. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. You have several stresses in a row there in the middle of that line. And then pyrrhic foot is when a syllable or 2 kind of gets swallowed. It can be a way of squishing an extra line into meter. And then there is a small website from a professor at Carson Newman University who has provided some examples of common words that are iambs, trochees, and so on. So let's click over to that. Not sure what my screen is doing here. Going to have to click over. There we go. Apologize for the kind of scruffy appearance of the screen here. But you see, you can go through and you might want to take a moment to say some of these phrases. An iamb like awake or of mice and men. A trochee like Pittsburgh, Douglas County. Spondies, football. Dactylic meter, carefully, changeable. Anapestic, interrupt, comprehend. And interestingly, of course, anapest itself is an anapest. And so you notice this is a PDF. You're welcome to save it for your future use. And I will place an independent link to it in Blackboard as well. So once you've got a handle on what the main meter of a line is, then you'll see how many feet. If you look at one of the Shakespeare poems, for example, and count out that there are 10 syllables in each of those lines, and those divide by 2, and they tend to be iambic. So that's iambic pentameter, 5 feet, pentameter, and so on. And then the last piece in describing a poem's structure will be to think about whether it has a fixed form, if any. You read several sonnets to begin studying poetry, and sonnet just means little song. It's any 14-line poem, and you've seen how various poets can have variations on a sonnet. A haiku is a fixed form controlled by its number of syllables. 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Those small 3-line poems, you might remember writing those back in earlier times in your education. And if you look up other terms such as ode, elegy, you will find that there are established poetic forms to go together with them. And then, of course, there is the concept of open form or free verse, which is a relatively new concept of the 20th century and later, where a poem doesn't have a particular rhyme scheme or a particular meter that remains consistent. And Robert Frost, one of the great American poets, did say that free verse was like trying to play tennis with the net down, but it does certainly have its place in the world of poetry too. Here are a couple of links to sites with more information, some interactive activities, particularly the UNC Chapel Hill website has nicer graphics with an example of scanned lines of poetry. And we are headed on to our second unit. Thank you.